And then when I turned 23 years old, I got shot 3 times in a drive-by shooting. My dad got to the hospital. They told him that I was going to have about a 50-50 shot of waking up that next morning, like surviving the night. And if I did, I had about a 10% chance of keeping my right leg.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneurs in Recovery podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you so much for subscribing to the YouTube channel. So right now we're at 197 subscribers, and my goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers. That's my goal. So we'd love for you to take the time right now to subscribe to the channel, and you can even hit that little bell. And every week you'll get reminders of the episodes coming out. I also put out shorts, YouTube shorts, which are like little reels from the episode. So you can get these highlights that were big takeaways from the episode. So go on to YouTube, find my channel at Jesse Harless, and subscribe. Thank you so much. So I am, just a little update, I am still in Costa Rica. No surprise there. I am still learning about myself. I'm learning about the land here. But one of the things I'm learning is I need to put out more content about my journey. So if you are interested in learning more about the journey of Costa Rica and what it's been like to be out here for the last almost a month now, and what it's like to rent here, and what it's like to eat here, what the people are like here, if you like some of that content and the updates of that, go ahead and let me know. Put that in the listener submission form. So every single week, if you go to the show notes, you're going to see the listener submission form. Go ahead and put that request in there. Say, hey, yes, Jess, I want to hear about your journey in Costa Rica. I want to hear more about these fascinating people you're meeting in Costa Rica and outside of Costa Rica that are having these big discussions about the future of mental health and addiction and thriving and holistic health and esoteric knowledge and all these things that I like to dive into on the show. And of course, psychedelic assisted therapy. So if that's something you're interested, go ahead and submit that listener submission form, or make a submission there, or just send me an email if you want, or message me on Instagram. So with that said, I want to talk about today's guest, Brandon Peacock. So Brandon is someone that is another one of those souls that reached out to me that I didn't know. And his story is fascinating. So you really want to pay attention to this episode. Brandon was caught in a drive-by shooting by mistake. He was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And if you want to hear that story of the journey of his PTSD, his mindset, battling those demons of getting back to life, and then what happened as a result of being shot in his nonprofit foundation, and now his life's mission is being dedicated to what happened to him, definitely tune into this episode. It has a lot more content than that. We talk about mentorship. We talk about many other things, but I would love for you to just tune into this episode, check out Brandon's work, and enjoy. Hey, Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Yeah. So, people find me different ways. Some people find me through, my past, or they find me through recovery, or along the entrepreneurial journey I've been on the last 7 years. And some people find me through outreach and reaching out to different podcasts to try to get on. And your team reached out, and we had a conversation, and I thought it was going to be a great fit to bring you on and share your story with our audience, because, I have the word recovery in my podcast title, and you've had an incredible recovery. Most humans will never experience what you experience. So I'm really excited to dive into your story today and to have you on the show.
Appreciate that, man. I'm very thankful too. I know when we chatted a couple of weeks ago there, I was really impressed with your unique journey as well. There's a lot of people who go through similar situations to what you would have gone through and don't prosper and become as resilient as you obviously were to, throughout everything. So I've got a ton of admiration for your journey as well. And I'm glad we connected.
Yeah, thanks, brother. I'm really curious. So, my guests, they often open up with their story, and I would love to maybe have you, one of the stories we like to hear is like, how did you become who you are today? But maybe we can just kind of slow it down and go to like, you can talk about your journey in whatever way, shape, or form, but we definitely want to hear about what happened to you, and we can maybe take it to that place of what happened to you, and then we'll go from there. That sounds good.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you kind of like a high level of everything, just for the sake of time here. But long story short, I was like the most average dude in my 20s. I mean, I went to university, started working a corporate job, was working as a corporate consultant at the time, living what I thought was the dream, what my parents told me was the dream. And then when I turned 23 years old, I got shot 3 times in a drive-by shooting. So I was walking into my barber shop to get a haircut, and this was in June 2020, so in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And as I'm walking into the shop, 2 cars rip up. They have a target that they're trying to hit. That target's not me, but the target ends up sprinting through a door that's being opened for me to walk in to get my haircut. He sprints through there. I'm able to use my body to shield the woman who's holding the door open for me, launch the 2 of us into the shop. But as the third man in, I got hit 3 times not in the crossfire because there was no shooting back, but in the shooting into the shop. So I got hit in the left side of my chest. So the bullet actually exited. You could almost see it here, like exited at the top of my collarbone. It's hard to see over camera. Entered at the bottom left of my shoulder blade. So it actually hit my ribs. It broke like all of my ribs, but it went right around my heart and my lungs. So extremely fortunate with the way that bullet hit me. If that was the only bullet that hit me, I actually would have been out of the hospital that same night. They didn't even really realize it hit me when we were preparing for surgery. The second bullet hit me in the left knee, which was kind of a ricochet bullet and wasn't too big of a deal. Again, it was like an extreme paper cut is the best way to explain it. It was surprisingly the most painful of the 3, but it was kind of a nothing, bullet to get hit with. And then the third bullet that hit me severed my femoral artery, and that was by far the worst of the 3. You bleed out so quickly from a bullet to the femoral artery, it's actually a greater likelihood of death than taking a bullet to the head, which surprises a lot of people. But I had an officer on scene, a police officer, first responder, who was there in 4 minutes after the shooting, got a tourniquet on my leg, gave me enough time to make it to the hospital that night after being shot. When I got prepared for surgery that night, I actually had called my mom while I was bleeding out on the barbershop floor because the woman that I was able to shield thought I was going to die. So she handed me the phone and said, "Who do you want to call?" So I called my mom. And because I called my mom, she knew that everything had happened. She sent my dad to the hospital because she was actually out of town at the time. But my dad got to the hospital. They told him that I was going to have about a 50-50 shot of waking up that next morning, like surviving the night. And if I did, I had about a 10% chance of keeping my right leg, the one where the artery had been hit, because basically what had happened was blood started pooling at the bottom of my leg because it couldn't flow back up to my heart. So they did a double fasciotomy, tore my leg kind of apart in efforts of trying to save it. And then I got rushed into surgery that night to do what's called a femoral bypass surgery, where they took the saphenous vein out of my left leg, replaced the artery in my right leg, and fortunately saved both my life and my leg and gave me a fighting chance to recover. So that next morning I was told that, again, I was very thankful to be alive. Like I should be grateful, but I probably was never going to walk normally again. I almost definitely wasn't going to return to sports and doing the things that I love to do as an active 23-year-old. But I kind of took that with a grain of salt and ended up recovering very well. I had a best friend who's a physiotherapist who worked me out 5 hours a day, 7 days a week, totally for free. I owe my life to this guy, but he knows I would have done the same for him. Like we legitimately were best friends before the shooting. So it's funny, in a lot of ways, I was the best candidate to get shot. He also wasn't working because it was the COVID pandemic and he just graduated university. So because he'd graduated university, he couldn't take his national exam to be a licensed practicing in-clinic physiotherapist. So we had all the knowledge of a physiotherapist without a job. So we had this little rinky-dink home gym basement in his house, and we would just work out 5 hours a day nonstop. If he went to a cottage that summer, I went to a cottage that summer. If he went to a family vacation that summer, I went to a family vacation that summer. We were like inseparable at the hip. And the recovery went so well that I was back to playing hockey 2 months after. I ran my first 5K about probably 8 to 10 weeks after everything. 13 months later, I ran my first full marathon in about 4 hours time. Like, I did all of these big things because of the support that I had from him. And then I started my charity, Hit the Ground Running, as kind of an homage to all the help that he gave me along that recovery journey, because we realized with high quality physiotherapy from somebody who's willing to push you hard, and genuine like support and hope from a team of mentors and a community around you, you can recover so much better than any doctor tells you that you will, right? And the reality is they have to worry about liability. There are things that these individuals have to worry about. So I get why they let, they don't want to create false hope, I guess, but like, I'm in the business of creating like what some would consider false hope. So anyways, I recovered really well. And then I started running my charity to help other trauma survivors have access to the resources that I did. And so far we've been able to help a bunch of kids, have a fighting chance at recovery that they probably otherwise wouldn't have had because of the institutions that we have in place today. So, wow. Lots still to come with my story, but it's been, 4 years. I've run 2 marathons. I'm training for my first Ironman now. And by far, most importantly to me, we've helped a lot of kids who don't have, the same luck of the draw that I did after being shot. So, at a high level, that's my story.
Wow. What a story. What an opening. It's really mind blowing. I want to ask a few questions. Of course, we'll get into your charity and that work. But it's so interesting to think about your life and how you said, oh, my life was average. Like, I was an average guy, average life. And then you get hit by a drive-by shooting. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like your life ignited on purpose. It became on purpose. And it's so interesting to see that happening. Now, were you happy before? Did you have a life where you're like, hey, I'm happy, things are going well? Or what was it like before that happened?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't have considered myself happy in retrospect. At the time, there was moments that I was happy, of course, like I had an exceptionally awesome friend group, right? I had a job that paid me well and treated me well. I had all of these things that on paper should make you happy. But the reality is, I was out drinking 2 nights a week, partying my face off, right? Like I wasn't really living a life of purpose. I was just living a life of all of the things that my parents told me were valuable, right? And I wouldn't, now that I know what genuine happiness feels like, which comes from, accomplishing these things you set your mind out to do and creating a better impact in the world, I would say I wasn't nearly as happy as I am now. And there was a lot of times where I was really sad back then, right? Like where I felt kind of hopeless. I was looking for that purpose that I hadn't previously found, but I also don't think I knew I was as sad as I was, if that makes sense. Because I thought, even when things were really bad sometimes and I was questioning everything, I just thought that's what life was, until I realized after getting shot, life can actually be a little bit more than that.
Yeah, how many people are like that? It's like, oh, this is as good as it's going to get, and you sort of just accept it. And I did that myself for sure. And I think that not that you have to get shot to have this experience, but like you obviously, it felt pretty divine that you had all these things in place once you got shot. Almost like, this is like kind of set up. Someone set this up, which is really amazing. It's a blessing. But I'm really curious. What was it like after? Because now you're just living your life. You're going to get a haircut. You get shot down. What kind of, to me, that's like PTSD. Like there's going to be fear happening. And what was that like? Did you experience that? What was that fear like?
I did, yeah. So I'll take you through maybe a couple of different phases, because there really was an evolution of how I felt after the shooting. And the first few weeks, I was like as dialed as I've ever been. And it's funny because people ask me how I was able to be so resilient, but I think from the time I was a kid, my parents, they did an exceptional job of parenting me so that when I was faced with adversity, I was able to prosper, right? And I always kind of loved being an underdog. I loved having, everything stacked against me. It was something that I really, really like flourished in those moments. It was actually the moments I was doing well where I kind of struggled a little bit. So after I'd been shot and I was kind of written off, but had a fighting chance, I was ecstatic, right? It's so weird to say, but like I was in my hospital bed, literally 45 pounds lighter. So I clocked in, I think, 140 to 145 pounds the day after I got shot, and I weigh about 190 pounds, right? So I was like this corpse who couldn't move, couldn't do anything, was so drained, but I was stoked. Like I was happy. I was planning my recovery already. I was reading books, trying to learn about like the mental health side of things and the PTSD and all of that really quickly on. So after, it's really weird, but I was excited. I was happy. I was fortunate and grateful to be alive, but it was this cool challenge that I got to pursue now, right? That I never anticipated I would ever have a chance to do in my life, which sounds really weird. Um, but as I started reintegrating into society, no matter how many books I read on PTSD, no matter how much theory I consumed, it was hard, man. Like it was really, really, really challenging trying to reintegrate into the world for two reasons, right? And the first was I had PTSD and was horrified of literally walking down the street, walking into the store. I tell this one story of 2.5 months after I got shot, I was at the LCBO, which is a liquor store in Ontario. It's all government regulated where I live. And it was COVID, so everyone's wearing masks. And what ended up happening was the dudes who shot me, to the best of my knowledge, were Bloods. So like they all had like red bandanas on. And it's one of the really clear memories I have of that night. And I saw this just small homeless dude. Like this guy must have been 4'10", 85 pounds, like just tiny, but he was wearing a red bandana. And I literally situated myself around like a shelf, grabbed a bottle, and was like ready to fight this guy, like full blown ready to just swing if I had to, because I thought he was after me. And my friend who I was with kind of caught me and was like, dude, like, what are you doing? And that was the first time I realized, okay, we're kind of in trouble here. And then I had a similar incident at the gym a little bit after, where I kind of just went into straight like panic attack mode, where I thought everyone around me was there to end my life, right? And I really just started to dive more into the theory, trying to learn about why I was thinking the way that I was, because I knew it was valid, right? And I also knew that, you know, after a situation like that, my nervous system was overriding my rational thought, right? Because in my brain, I knew that this was irrational thinking, but my nervous system had fully taken over, right? So I started learning about how to manage that. And I learned about this thing called exposure therapy. And for me, that personally worked, where I started doing crazy stuff. Like I started running my favorite part of my recovery is I started going for runs, like, 12 weeks out from everything, when I was kind of hobbling these 5Ks. I started going out and doing runs in the middle of the night in the sketchiest area of my city, because in my mind, like the worst thing that was going to happen was I got killed, right? But if I was going to get killed, like it would have just kind of confirmed the already big fears that I had, right? So I needed to do something really big to remind myself that all of this was in my head, right? And what ended up happening is, after a few weeks of going out for these late night, just horror jogs, I realized that, okay, like actually nothing's happened. Like no one has even approached me. Like the world is so much safer than you think it is. And you're told it is. And, maybe it's because I'm 6'2", 190 pounds. So maybe no one's messing with me the same as they would somebody else in those areas. I don't know. I'm also not an intimidating 6'2", 190. But eventually I slowly started to kind of expose myself to the things that scared me so much that I started to come over them. And that's kind of how I started to come back into normalcy. And then it kind of started to wear on me in a different way, where I started to realize how fortunate I was to have been through all of this and how much I grew from all of it. That when I was supposed to go back to my job that I was previously working in, the life I previously lived, then it started to wear on me in a totally different way, because I was really stressed. Like I felt like I had so much more to offer the world than what I'd been previously doing. So I kind of felt out of place in my old body, if that makes sense, from all of the evolution. So there were these three like just phases, I guess you could say. And then the final stage would be when I actually just had the courage to step out and do my own thing and live this new life. And now it's a different set of stresses and fears of failure and all the stuff that entrepreneurs deal with. But I'll tell you, that's my favorite stage of all four of them, that we just talked about, because, I feel like I'm kind of even in the face of stress and all these obstacles, I feel like I'm where I need to be for the first time in a long time. So that's kind of what the evolution mentally has been like for me. It's been an interesting one.
Wow. Yeah. That's exposure therapy. That's not only is that very interesting, but the way you did it was, some would say probably pretty extreme, but that's what you needed to do. And I wonder how many people in the world and maybe listening are afraid to, run their first 5K or marathon or write their first book or speak on stages or facilitate. And, how else do you learn without doing it and exposing yourself to these environments? Now, yours was a little more extreme, but I've heard of these types of scenarios, especially with veterans and healing from PTSD or dealing with, these traumas. So that's really interesting that you did that. And I'm wondering, when you decided to, it sounds like you left your job, right, to start this charity. What was that process like? I mean, that must have been, was it less challenging because of what you went through, or is it, what was that like to start your own business?
Yeah, so it actually was like a 2 year journey. So it sounds like it was just I quit my job and started, but what actually ended up happening is I was working as a consultant, and when I was forced to go back into work, I was forced to go back about 6 months after the shooting. Which, I was running these 5Ks and doing these things, but I also like needed to be in physiotherapy 2 to 3 hours a day, right? Like my body was still destroyed. I was just powering through the destruction at that point. And what ended up happening was I got forced back into work because insurance, basically said, if you can sit at a desk, you can make sales calls, right? So when I got forced back in, I quit my job and I started living off my savings for the next year. And what I did during that time was I didn't focus on my charity. I didn't really do anything. I just spent 5 hours a day in the gym. Like literally, I just burned through every dollar I had saved up in my early 20s to go do physio every day. And after that, I ran out of all my money pretty quickly. I maxed out my credit card pretty quickly. And after I ran that first marathon, I went back and I got a job at a not-for-profit called Canadian Blood Services. So I wanted to switch up my industry because I knew the goal down the road was to grow my own charity. But I had no idea like how to do it. I didn't know anything about the charitable side of the world. It was so foreign to me as a consultant that I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I went and I worked that job for a year, and I hated it in the sense that I love the work that they do. Like blood products saved my life, but I found it was so bureaucratic. There was so much red tape. Like everything was so difficult to push forward, that I really struggled because I cared so much about growing what they do, right, and their mission. So then I quit that job to focus on my charity full time, and it was really easy. Honestly, it was easy because I took the time necessary to save up a little bit so I could make that transition. I spent the time necessary to grow into the man I needed to be to make that transition. But kind of on your initial point, I figured, what's the worst that's going to happen, right? Like I'm playing on house money kind of at this point. And I think I'm really fortunate to have had those lows that, what people would consider lows in my life. Mm-hmm. So I was able to kind of put the transition in perspective. And now the biggest part of all of that is when I'm sitting here and I have no idea what I'm doing with work. Because, no matter how many entrepreneurs tell you that they know everything, like none of them do, right? Like it's always a learning process every day. Now I at least know that I'm capable of doing the things necessary to learn and grow. And none of that would have happened without the previous years of just experience and effort and like constant trying to figure out these new things. So it made the process a lot less scary for sure. I wouldn't say it made it less stressful. I think I always say, quitting my job and starting my charity and living this life is so much more stressful than it was like recovering from getting shot. Because in the recovery process, I had a roadmap, right? I just had to show up and work hard every day. That's easy. It's easy to show up and work hard every day. In my opinion, if you have something you actually care about, but it's really hard to know what you need to do every day when no one tells you, right? And I've got some great mentors. I've got some amazing people in my life. But even then, they don't know the unique intricacies of the work that I'm doing, right? Like they're tech guys, a lot of them. So it's different. So yeah, it didn't make it easier per se, it just made me a lot more confident in the man that I am and my ability to solve the complex problems, I guess, of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And I think for those listening, that's that's it. Like when I first started my business, Entrepreneurs in Recovery, I didn't know what I was doing. There was no one to even coach me into what I was doing. Mentors couldn't tell me what to do because there was such a niche that didn't even exist in the way I wanted it to happen. Of course, there's business principles and there's marketing, and those are things I would come later on to understand a little bit better. I'm still not great at it today, but the beginning was just like so challenging. Like what I went from a career at Verizon working 45 hours a week or more. And now I'm on my own and I'm like, what do I do with my time? Right. And so eventually you start to create systems, you start to create programs, you start to create things, and you just try it out. But it takes years. It took years for things to start to click. And that's why having a mentor is great. But, so if your mentor is not in your niche and understanding, it can still be helpful, but you have to figure it out yourself. You're your co-creator of your universe. Like you're the one that has to, go to sleep at night and be able to fall asleep with what you did, even if you don't exactly know what you're doing. And I think that's what I was hearing. So I'm curious before we can, jump into your charity and stuff, what was it like the mentors you had? Did you hire a coach? I mean, to get you to start to do the things you needed to do, because I noticed like your social media and stuff and your posting on there, and like when did you start to realize like, oh, this is what I need to do to grow my following, to raise money for my charity, and to make things happen?
Yeah, so I was really lucky. I had some awesome mentors in my circle already who really wanted to help with the mission that I was on, right? And one of the guys in particular, his name's Jamie Lee's, one of my best friends. I'm sending him to Colombia next week to document some of the stem cell therapy we're doing for one of our grantees. Just a guy I trust with my life is one of my best friends growing up, and he owns a social media marketing agency. So it all really started when I'd say probably 8 weeks into recovery, we met at a coffee shop and I hobbled in there like off crutches, but like barely holding on, like I was in my hobble phase, and I walk up to the table, he's sitting down, and I look at him and I was like, listen, I'm going to cut right to it. You seem like one of my friends who's crazy enough to be down to run a marathon with me in the next year. And he looks at me like perplexed. And I tell him, I want to do this because I want to prove to myself, that I'm back. And this is the only way that I know how to do that. And at the time I knew I wanted to start some sort of charity, some sort of business, whatever it is, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I did want to document the process because I was really fortunate to have, survived such a unique thing. I wanted to remember it, right? I knew that eventually the lessons from that time would fade. I want to be able to look back on it. So Jamie, as like just one of the best creatives I've ever met, like literally the best creative I've ever met, and I've come across a lot of them. When it comes to coaching and mentoring in that space, he mentored me and showed me how to create the content specific to my story and that evolution. And we were able to create, man, like probably over 40 million cumulative views right now across our socials. TikTok was our big one for a while, and then I kind of stopped posting, and it got hit a little bit because of that. But it was really what he would always tell me is it's selfish not to share your journey because somebody out there needs to see what you're going through. And through those principles, he really helped me out a ton. So yeah, and then I had some business mentors as well who some of them are social media like personalities, some of them are business owners who run seven figure businesses in their 20s, like guys who've just done really well. And I was really fortunate. So yeah, I had some great mentors, and we really recognized how fortunate I was to have the story that I did early on and how many people it would resonate with. So we try to be as public about it as we could. And the beautiful part of that is I've spoken to like hundreds of trauma survivors now, especially through TikTok when we were first blowing up, like people with stories that I was never an expert in the space. I was never somebody like a thought leader. I'd never read, all of the literature and gone and got a degree in this stuff. But what I realized is I was able to help these people a lot more than most psychotherapists were, because I was just another dude living it and progressing. So it was really cool. Like it was really cool, that evolution, and the mentors I had, I'd be probably back working that corporate job if it wasn't for them, because they showed me what I was capable of, working on my own. So it's very fortunate to have them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I appreciate you sharing that because I think a lot of people are struggling to ask for help and to find people that can guide them in the business. And, they think they don't have the money to hire a coach, but like there's many people you can just try to get coffee with or just try to, authentically approach them for help. And whatever help you receive, be grateful that you got that help. And so just once
Well, and
again, yeah.
I was like, I'll even add on to that, because I think it's important to note now that I've come through this evolution is, if I didn't have those connections in my network, I would have paid for them like 100% without a doubt, because the value that they bring to you is so important, right? And like, this isn't me plugging anything. Like, I don't do this particular. I'm also probably not qualified to be a mentor to a lot of people, maybe some, but not, different, definitely not entrepreneurs. I'm not there yet. But the guys I've worked with, their value on my life has probably, it would have, if you put a dollar and cent value to it, it would be 100x the value that they gave me, just from being able to consume the knowledge that they have. And I know that people are oftentimes scared of that. And there is like con artists out there who are like preaching that stuff. But if you find somebody who's a good mentor, try to reach out to people in your network. But if you have to pay somebody for their time and you're able to learn from them, I personally think it's worth it.
Yeah, same. And yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. It's very interesting to hear that part of the journey because, you can have an amazing story and so many people have such powerful stories that they could bring to the world and so many people would benefit and maybe their lives would even be saved potentially from their stories. But again, they have, the different blocks and different, but finding a way with a mentor or eventually if you had to pay for a coach and figure out how to do that is just essential. And that's really how I also got started too. It's, I read a book and there was this mentor and he couldn't even be my mentor. He was inaccessible in that way, but like I just studied his work and then I went to one of his events and then I met him and then I just found ways to get close to him. And then I, eventually was able to be mentored by him, but it took a
Who was
while.
that? If you don't mind me asking, I'm curious. I
Um,
had a similar like virtual guy who I've never met who changed my life too.
Well, ironically enough, his podcast is coming out probably tomorrow. So his name is
Nice.
Hal Elrod, and he wrote The Miracle Morning. And I was working on my 9 to 5, happy. I was happy in quotations, like happy as far as like I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do as an award-winning sales rep and all these things. But then I read his book and I started this morning practice he has. And the next thing you know, I went to one of his events and I just got promoted at my job. And I watched this guy who's only a few years older than me. He had been an entrepreneur for a really long time. And I was like, what is this about? Like this guy's around my age and he's has this freedom, this time freedom, these things that like I just want to experience and have. So it planted a massive seed for me to leave my job a year later. And but I had to pay to play. I had to pay to get into his mastermind and learn from him. And eventually, I found other mentors because of him. But yeah, I mean, you have to do whatever it takes. You went out to the hood, quote unquote, right, to get exposure therapy so you can start to heal your PTSD. No one told you to do that. You did that, and that's the message. Like, no one's coming to save you. Go out there, ask for mentors. Go out and do the things that it's going to take for you to live your life of your full potential. And so, with that said, you probably today, I'd imagine you do mentor people, right? I mean, I would imagine you do mentor plenty of people now. Um, do you have like a program or something where you mentor people, or is that part? Let's get into your charity too. Like, well, what
Sure.
hit the ground running? Maybe you could talk about mentorship and the charity that you have.
Yeah, it's funny. So we're actually launching a mentorship program very soon, and I'm really torn. I'll be honest with you, because I want to make it unpaid. Like I really just love mentoring these kids who've been through trauma. It's something that's so important to me, in the sense that I think such a big part of the healing process from any sort of trauma or situation that you've been through comes from the impact you're able to leave on the world due to the situation, right? If you go through a situation and you don't find any purpose through it, you're significantly more likely to be what I would consider a victim of your situation, right? Whereas if you find a way to leverage it as something that made you, closer to your life's purpose, let's say, I think it's a net positive, right? So for me, having the opportunity to have been through my situation and what I would consider prospered through it, right? I've done the thing a lot of these kids are aspiring to do. If I can leave a lasting mark on them, and then they can do the things that they aspire to do and then kind of pay it forward in that way, that's like my favorite thing to do in the world. So we are launching a mentorship program. I don't know if it's going to be paid or free yet. I really want to make it free. If it's paid, it's going to be super cheap to enter, and we'll do it fully virtually kind of through my social medias and my networks there. And the goal with that program is basically just to have a 1 week call, and I want it to be like accountability focused, and lessons shared focused. So for example, I've got a call standing every week now with my spinal cord injury survivors that I work with. And it basically, the purpose of this call is for the three of them to chat, right? Like I just mediate the call because I don't know spinal cord injury as well as these three do. But they push each other really hard, right? They sit there, they go through what they've learned each week in physiotherapy and recovery, the mental things they've been battling, some of the other stuff too that comes with injury like that like I'm not familiar with, like bladder problems and all that stuff. And like they give each other support and guidance, and it kind of ripples out, right, to their networks and who they impact. So the mentorship piece has been huge. And what I'll say too on that note, because there's one very special like mentee, I guess you could say, that I've had in my life that has genuinely changed my life is my man Gavin. He's one of the kids we first took in through the charity. He was shot in the spine, saving his brother's life in a robbery. Genuinely one of the just most genuinely awesome kids I've ever met. And I mentored him. Like he reached out to me, I think a month and a half after he was shot, because he had no resources. Insurance cut him off the second he wasn't making immediate progress, which is like immediately with a spinal cord injury, right? Like you don't make progress every day when you have a spinal cord injury. It's just not the case, right? And he was on a 3-month wait list to get publicly funded healthcare, physiotherapy care, which when you have a neurospecific injury is way too long, because you've got a year to make 80% of your progress or 90% of your progress. So he reached out to me basically because he saw my TikToks and wanted to know if we could help him. And at the time, we had no money in the bank. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just a dude talking on social media about an idea that I had. But we figured it out. We've been covering his rehab costs for the last, I think, like 2.5 years now. It's been a while at the very least. And on top of those recovery costs, I've been speaking to him on the phone the first year, probably about two times a week, maybe 3 times a week, sometimes 1 time a week, but at least, at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times. And I got to watch him go from this kid who, had his life flipped upside down, developed an eating problem, blew up to like 240 pounds, was, going through it, to this like just driven, resilient, incredible man who's defying all of the odds now. Like he's starting to walk with a walker and no braces on, which is unheard of for paralyzed kids, right? Like he's making all these evolutions. And that was my real first experience, like mentoring somebody and seeing the evolution that he's made. He's now mentoring other kids now, especially the ones that come through me that I can't connect with as closely because I'm not a spinal cord injury survivor. I'll direct them to him now. But it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life, right? I mean, it sounds really weird to say because I wouldn't consider it to be this, but if you asked him, he would say, I'm the massive part of his recovery, right? I think I was just kind of the vessel who helped him do what he otherwise would have done because he's so resilient. But I was really hard on him. I told him the things that none of his friends had the courage to tell him because they were afraid of hurting his feelings when he was already down, kicking him while he was down. I would tell him, listen, I know that your situation sucks. I actually don't fully understand how bad it is, but I could not imagine how tough it is to have paralysis. But if you're not in the gym every day, if you're skipping your sessions because you want to go out late with your buddies and do all this stuff, you're hurting yourself, right? And like, I'm covering your bills. I need you to show up. And we had some of those hard conversations at the start, and like very quickly on, he adapted, he learned, he showed up for himself. And now 7 days a week, every day, he's in the gym working out. He's doing all of the things necessary to recover. He's literally the most resilient kid I've ever met.
Mm.
And, you know, it's incredible. Like I would get shot 100 times over to be able to play the role that I did in his life, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And, yeah, it's been one of the most fulfilling things that I could have ever imagined, and I don't think I would have known what that feeling was like, without going through what I've been through and recovering the way that I did. So, mentorship is genuinely, I think it's everything. Even if you just need a friend to hold you accountable, it's so important.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm sure he's probably featured on maybe your Instagram too, and.
Yeah.
I just really, really appreciate what you said about, you would get shot 100 more times. I mean, it sounds extreme, but that's the same with me with my addiction, where how extreme the addiction got with heroin and Oxycontin and all these things that happen. I would have it happen again, because it gave me this opportunity to live a life in recovery where I could actually speak and say things to people that are just down and out. It's not, and I'm talking about in the early stages. And now, like, obviously I'm 18 and a half years into this journey. It's changed quite a bit who I talk to, but I still talk to people who are at the beginning stages, or even like really successful entrepreneurs who are sort of sex addiction, gambling addiction, substance addiction, even like workaholism. That's a big one. And so to be able to speak, it's like the greatest gift addiction gave me is to be able to do that. So I really love that message. And
when you become open with your story too, I think this beautiful thing happens where a lot of people who are struggling behind closed doors, like people you wouldn't have thought are going through these things, they feel comfortable talking about their situations with you, right? And they're not looking for pity, most of them. They're just looking for somebody to, somebody who understands what they're going through and can help them kind of go in the right direction, right? And I think that's one of the coolest parts about being so open with my story and having a story like this is so many people I never would have thought are struggling, and they felt, open enough to come to me after everything I've talked about and put out to the world. And I'm sure it's been the same with you. And man, that's such a beautiful gift in its own right. We need to be more vulnerable as a collective, and not like vulnerable in a woe is me, like I'm a victim sense, but vulnerable in I'm struggling, I'm trying to figure it out, and kind of lifting one another up in pursuit of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like recovering out loud. You're recovering out loud. You could have kept this journey to yourself, right? You could have had this introspective journey that you just stayed on. Instead, you were like, oh my God, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this experience to help others. And it's the same, I guess, in so many stories, but especially in like these stories you hear of recovery of addiction. There's so many beautiful stories, and some people do it in the church basements, and that's beautiful. And some people come out and get on a podcast and talk about it and openly share, but it will save lives for sure. I mean, before I got on this podcast, I watched a veteran who did MDMA assisted therapy out of the country, and he's now advocating all over to what this medicine experience did for him. And how brave do you have to be to do that? I mean, it's not even legal here therapeutically, but it has the potential to be. So I am like, man, I want to get this guy on my podcast as well, because it's like, this guy's doing that same thing. Like, he has war trauma, he has these things that happen to him. And then he had this experience. Now he wants to share, and that living that life on purpose. I mean, that's what I hear big time in your story. And because
it's not always, it's not always the popular opinions that need to be shared either, right? I think that's important about the man you're talking about there. He's sharing something that there's probably a lot of people who disagree with, right? And they probably, you hear about, MDMA, for example, and you just immediately write something off. And, if things aren't, I don't want to say, I guess, social norms, right? If they're not necessarily culturally accepted normal practices, it takes a whole different set of courage to discuss some of this stuff, right? And I've got a tremendous amount of respect for that. And I think, as a collective, we need to be more open and willing to, take things with a grain of salt and listen, to one another and try to move forward together instead of kind of like alienating people, I guess. So that was just a side tangent, I guess. But I love the work that guy's doing. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, same. I mean, that's why we have these platforms, right? You have your platform, I have my platform. It's because I'm told this, I'm told that, I'm getting all this programming, and I'm like, no, thank you. And I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to give feedback and have authentic conversations so I can hear this anecdotal evidence, which is really profound, of these stories that eventually will hopefully be science. But right now it's anecdotal. Some of it is becoming science slowly but surely. But there's a lot of pharmaceutical industries you got to get by and all these different regulations. So I think it's like living a life without regret, right? Going out and going for it. And that's what you radiate out. It's like, oh my God, you could have so played the victim, right? With what happened to you. And instead it's like, you know what, I'm going to go and do this. And you're also grateful for the people that you recognize that were in your life, because you could have even had those people in your life and been like, you could have had a story about those people and not utilized your best friend for rehabilitation and not utilized a social media expert, right? You could have said, well, they don't really want to help me because they're too busy. But no, you're like, oh my God, this is such a great blessing. I'm going to use these. I'm going to not use these people, but I'm going to leverage these people to. So it's all about perspective, right? It's perspective. It's perspective, looking at life from an abundance mindset instead of a deficit mindset, and really going forward.
I'm grateful for not just the people who helped me, but I'm grateful for the people who shot me too, right? As crazy as that sounds, I mean, it becomes really easy. Like one of the things I always talk about with the kids that I work with is I think in this world that we live in, it's easier to be the victim than it is the successor, right? And I think it's because we have a culture of over empathy. And I think that comes from a genuinely good place. I think it's because people genuinely care about uplifting and supporting their fellow man and woman, right? I think that's exceptional. The problem is, I think there's maybe a bit of a laziness around that where people actually don't want to tell you the hard truths of life. They just want to tell you the things that make them sound like they care about you, if that makes sense. But one of the things I always tell the kids that I work with is, if you died the night that you were shot, for example, that would be on the shooter, like that is on them. Of course, that's on them, right? But the second that you wake up that next morning, it's no longer in their control, right? They're not the one who's forcing you to skip therapy every day. They're not the one who's forcing you to not give it 100% every moment that you're awake and trying to recover, right? Like they're not there anymore. They're gone. They've probably forgotten about you. Right? Like they might be stressed about you because they might go to jail over you, but they're not sitting there thinking like, damn, I wish that guy's stops, pursuing something, right? It's on you. It's totally on you. And I think we live in this culture where we promote the villainization of others in a way to, almost to normalize like the lack of accountability, I guess, that individuals have sometimes, right? And that's where I say, I'm thankful for the guys who shot me because they gave me an opportunity to tell a story I never would have been able to tell, right? And that answer would have changed if I died the night that I was shot. It probably would have changed if I had a significant impairment. And I've got a few significant impairments, but nothing that's debilitating. But everything is about perspective, right? And if I sat there every day, wishing that the guys who shot me went to jail and had their lives taken away and all this stuff, it would have been a net negative on my life. It would have done absolutely nothing towards moving me forward in the recovery process. And if anything, it would have just been a cop-out for me not becoming the man who I now know that I am, right? So, it's easy to blame others, even when it's probably their fault that you've ended up in a situation that you have. But it's a lot harder, but also a lot more rewarding to take some accountability there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well said. And I am curious now, did they catch the shooter?
So they caught 3 of them. There was 8 people involved. So there was 2 cars full. Everything's on video. They caught 3 of them and they all got released. So none of them went to jail.
So there's another ultimate act of mercy, forgiveness, right? Because of these people.
It's not my decision. I
Right,
was uninvolved from it. I had to testify or else I would have gone to jail. So that was, certainly something. So in Canada, our legal system is, it's not very good, I think is the best way to explain it. That's how my mom would say, putting it lightly. But they caught three of them. They're all on video. Their faces are on camera, but they didn't go to jail because they charged the shooter as the driver as the shooter, and then another guy in another thing. And they couldn't put the gun in the driver's hands. Like they couldn't basically tie them to the specific charge. And instead of charging them with something else, they just threw the whole case out. So, you know, I'll be honest, it didn't really bother me too much. It hit me for about half an hour that they were going to be out walking the streets that I was on. But, you know, I was able to process it pretty well because I think I've grown so much from the situation. It hit my mom a lot harder than it hit me. It hit my parents were a little bit unhappy. And, you know, I will say that if it was my brother who'd been shot and not me, I probably would hold a little bit more resentment towards those people because I can't step in his shoes and recover for him. You know, I can never know that he's okay. But me, it's out of my control, right? Like those guys don't bother me at all. I hope that they turn their lives around and live great lives, right? Like I have no resentment whatsoever. But yeah, no jail for any of them. They were all found innocent, I guess you could say, and were let off.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about this, and I know people are probably going to hear that and be angry or whatever. But my thought is like, yeah, I can see the anger, but I can also see what was going through that. It was probably a young man's mind when he shot and hit you. You know what I'm saying? What was going on in his life to get to a point where he's doing a drive-by to take someone's life? And I also
I know the answer to this one.
Okay, please.
Yeah, so what ended up happening, I found this out really quickly because they're around my age in the city. And Ottawa, where I live, is, you know, about 1 million or 2 million people, but it's a big, small city. Like you kind of know everybody. And the guys who shot me, it was a retaliation hit for one of their brothers being killed basically as the wrong guy in a drive-by, and this was the retaliation. So it's all pretty easy to find if you look for it. And I had friends share all of that information within, you know, literally a week or two of me being shot, like breaking everything down and why it happened. And, you know, the only resentment I maybe had at the time was maybe don't shoot up a public spot at 5:45 p.m. You know, like maybe be a little bit smarter about it if this is the life that you've chosen for yourself. But in reality, you know, I try to put myself in their shoes and I try to sit there and realize, you know, if I had grown up in a different situation under a very different set of circumstances and someone murdered my brother, how would I react? Right. And the truth is, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't pretend to know the answer to that question. I would hope I wouldn't ever put myself in that situation. But I love my brother very dearly, you know, and if someone took him from me and I felt like maybe I had nothing to live for, I don't know what I would do. Right. So I try to put myself in their shoes as hard as that might have been at first. And try to understand why what happened. And again, I don't think it's ever appropriate to respond with gun violence. You know, it's certainly not like justifying it from that lens and saying it's okay. But I tried to think about, you know, why it would happen. And it's a big part of why I don't hold animosity towards the people who shot me. Right. So yeah, it's interesting. But again, a lot of people think that maybe that's selfish of me to not wish that they'd been, you know, thrown in jail for a long time, or like not just like fought as hard as I possibly could to get the book thrown at them. But the reality of the situation is, you know, I wanted to move on from everything. I wanted to focus my life on, you know, evolution, right? And helping the individuals that I help and making a difference in the way that I can. And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't control the way the judge responds to, you know, the Crown and the defense's arguments and everything, right? It's totally out of my control. And if something's not in my control, I try to, you know, stay out of it as much as I can. Being upset about it wouldn't change anything, right?
Wow. Yeah, Brandon, it's been like a great pleasure to interview you today and like to hear not only your story of bouncing back and resilience, but just your overall energy towards life and the way that you're inspiring so many people. And you inspired me on this to just your perspective and the forgiveness that you have. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to answer my last question too. And I want to let the audience know, like, how can they find you? How can they follow you? How can they give to your charity? Maybe you can share some of that.
Yeah. I'll give a quick summary. I think it was definitely worth getting that last point in because it's not something I get to talk about enough, to be honest, but I think it's something that's so important when it comes to my whole healing journey. because the normal thought process would be to be resentful and be angry. And so many people would think like that. But I try to urge people to not go in that direction because it's just a waste of a great human experience, in my opinion, to be resentful and angry. But so yeah, super quick overview of Hit the Ground Running, my charity. We help trauma survivors get to their new 100% after a life-altering injury. So all inspired by my boy Frank, who is my physiotherapist. Basically what we do is we provide physiotherapy, psychotherapy, and other medical related costs to, individuals in recovery from a life-altering injury. For example, one of the kids we're working with now, his name's Isaiah, awesome dude, father of 3 young kids, cutest kids you'll ever see. So sweet, like just so well parented. He was shot as a bystander while visiting a family member out of town, left paralyzed from the waist down. We've been fundraising to pay for his physiotherapy every month for basically an indefinite period of time, to make sure he has the best fighting chance at recovery possible. We also fundraised about $35,000. We're trying to get it up to 50 now to cover 4 rounds of 400 or 300 million stem cell injections into his spinal cord area to help repair damaged tissue from the bullets in hopes of giving him the best chance of walking again. One of the things that I pride myself in when it comes to Hit the Ground Running and the charity work that I do is, instead of just throwing $1,000 at as many different trauma survivors as I can and, making a negligible difference in their recovery, but having more stories, is I try to take the resources that we raise and truly change these kids' lives. Even if it's a smaller number of people that we can help right now, it makes all of the difference for these kids. So Hit the Ground Running. If anybody wants to donate or check out Isaiah's story, Gavin's story, any of the kids that we work with stories, or learn a little bit about my story more, it's www.htgrcharity.com. So like hitthegroundrunningcharity.com. And you can check out my Instagram at Peacock, like the bird, _Brandon, BRANDON, to learn a little bit more about me and the work that I'm doing. Or HTGR Charity on Instagram to see the posts over there. They're mostly collab posts, but we'll be doing some more cool stuff soon. So yeah, it's my baby, my passion project. The thing that I love the most in this world right now is helping those kids. But it takes an army. I couldn't do it all by myself, even if I wanted to. So support from anybody listening, it goes so far. And we are fully tax deductible in both Canada and the United States as of now. So yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I'm so grateful you reached out, and I'm so grateful to be connected with you now. This is our second conversation, and this one was powerful. I cannot wait to share this out. Thank you for the amazing work you're doing. Thank you for this incredible episode, and I'm excited to bring you on in 6 months to a year and see where this is all has evolved to. So thank you, Brandon, so much.
I appreciate you having me, man. I love that. I love the energy that you put out there too. It's awesome.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you. Thanks for watching today's episode. Your support means the world to me. So thank you for liking and subscribing to the YouTube channel and to this podcast. We've got amazing content and amazing interviews coming out soon. So thanks again. Enjoy your day. Sending love and blessings to you all.